Hello, and thank you for joining Labels and Labeling as we explore the narrow web flexible packaging market. In today's session, you'll learn why flexible packaging is widely considered the fastest growing print segment and one that's proven to be profitable for narrow and mid-web converters. Today's webinar should last about an hour, and we want it to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and at the end, we'll definitely save some time for a Q&A. You can ask questions through the dashboard on your computer screen, and if you're unable to see it, click that orange arrow and that'll make it larger. Within that, you'll see a drop-down box to ask questions. Once the webinar is concluded, you'll be able to listen again at labelsandlabeling.com. So first, let me introduce our speakers today. With us is Catherine Haynes. She's a technical resource specialist with All Printing Resources. Last year, APR commissioned market researchers at LPC to study the narrow web flexible packaging market. Catherine will present the results of that study, which I'm sure you'll find very eye-opening. Also presenting today, we have Jeff Salisbury from Label Impressions in Southern California and Ryan Chai of Kala outside Salt Lake City, Utah. Both Jeff and Ryan are experts in flexible packaging production and have been producing it for more than a decade. So the webinar is scheduled to last about an hour, and there's lots to talk about, so let's get started. I'm going to kick it off to Catherine, who'll present, but first I want to poll the audience to kind of gauge where everyone is at in flexible packaging. So if you guys could take a quick second and answer, how long have you been producing flexible packaging? You're not currently producing, but you're assessing the market. 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, or more than 10 years. All right, so it looks like about 60% or so are not currently producing, but they're assessing the market, which is good. Then this will be a really great presentation for you to learn quite a bit.
I haven't seen the. I'm just waiting on the request to share my screen.
Okay, 1 second. All right, Catherine, you should have it.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. I think you guys should be able to see it. I'll give you a second just to make sure it's showing up for everybody. I'm Catherine with All Printing Resources, and so thank you, Chelsea, for the introduction and for the opportunity to talk this morning and share some of the research that we were able to work on with LPC last year. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and what I first like to do is just introduce you to APR. If you're not familiar with All Printing Resources, we're actually a distributor for the flexible packaging and flexo industry. So we do get into digital solutions, offset, gravure, and letterpress, but our primary focus is flexo and flexible packaging, but also narrow web. So we sell solutions from the press room all the way back up into pre-press and in the graphics area. And we don't actually manufacture anything but end seals. So that would be the one product or one thing that we do manufacture. And we also have a really unique RFID supply chain solution for inventory management. So those are some of that's a little bit unique, but the brands that we represent are probably some of the familiar ones that or manufacturers that like Lohmann and Tessa, 3M, McDermott, Dantex, and ESCO, EFI, so Teshcon and X-Rite. So there's just a lot of different types of products that we represent. Now, my name is, I'm trying to advance the slide here. Let's see. There it goes. Okay. So my name is Catherine Haynes, and I've been with All Printing Resources for a little over 15 years. Been in the industry for a little over 20 years, and I'm a G7 expert. Graduated from Clemson University, and have been part of the technical solutions group since I joined APR. And so a lot of what I do is to support all those different products. So I'm in the press room, I'm in pre-press areas, I'm working with graphic designers or our pre-press operators, I'm working with press operators. I get involved in color and training. You'll see stuff from our team, like blogs and articles and other types of things that are posted on our website and in other magazines and things as well. So basically, I'm a resource for our sales team, but also for our customers. And just our whole team tries to work with customers to implement solutions, to do trials and those types of things. So that's a little bit about APR, a little bit about myself. What I'm really here to talk to you guys about is a survey that we conducted with LPC last year. And we actually had a summit meeting in November of last year where we were able to present those findings. And so this is a recap of that summit. Our focus in that summit was really to better understand what was keeping label converters up at night. We wanted to understand if it's, the commoditization, is it, the increase in capacity, are they stressed out about the next 5 years? How are they going to maintain such sort of sustainable growth over the next 5 years? And one thing that we were seeing, or at least felt like we were seeing, was that there was this migration towards flexible packaging, or at least an interest in flexible packaging. Could flexible packaging be that interest or that solution for sustainable growth moving into the future? So this really formed the basis of our study. And again, we launched that study, or we revealed the study in November of last year. So originally we approached LPC and asked, what kind of research has already been done in this vein for narrow web flexible packaging? And we were actually really surprised to find out that there had been no research done, nothing at all. So again, this fueled us even further, or even more so, to go down this path. Now, if you're not familiar with LPC, they're a marketing and communications research partner. And so they work with industry suppliers like us. They work with converters, trade associations, and other organizations to really try to understand what's happening in our industry. So our interest was really to try to identify what were the trends, what was the potential growth, what were some of the challenges that narrow web printers who had made this transition, or were at least in the process of making this transition to flexible packaging, what were they seeing? What were they experiencing? And again, our focus, we kind of have a focus in flexible packaging and in the narrow web market. So this fit a niche for us. It's amongst our customer base. And we were able to survey more than 40 label converters in the US to get a better understanding of their pain points. Now, we set this up based on a few core questions just to understand the converters that had responded. And that first question was just to understand how long they've been in flexible packaging, how long have they been doing this. And I think you may be surprised to see that a lot of them have been doing this for over 5 years. So what does this say about this group that has responded to our survey is that this is not new to them, right? This is something they've been doing for many cases more than 5 years. And if they have been doing it for more than 5 years, you can kind of extract that they must be doing well at it. They're profiting, they're growing, because they're certainly investing the time to continue doing it. So this spoke a lot to just the experience level of the group of people that responded to the survey. Now, an extension, or I guess the next phase of this, is to better understand a breakdown of what applications were being served with flexible packaging. Were they all pouches? Were they all doing bags? We kind of suspected it would be a high level of pouches, and I think the research did, or the responses did reflect that on some levels. 50% of them are doing some type of pouch application. And this is one of the highest growing applications in the industry. So that kind of makes sense. A lot of things that it makes sense if you just think about walking into the grocery store. A lot of the things that were once bottled or canned, which are all labeled type products, were now being converted into pouches. And so we're talking like salad dressings and laundry detergents, and goodness, you can buy tuna in a pouch now. So I mean, just tons of different products that are converting to this. So it makes sense. It behooves the printers that were really good at printing the labels for those types of products would be interested in looking towards migrating their production to the pouch, you know, to where that work is being migrated to. So a couple others in the group there, sachet and stick packs, those were also ranked pretty high up there. I kind of felt like that was kind of an interesting, I don't know, I guess with a culture that's more and more interested in being environmentally conscious and sustainable, this kind of veers away from that. But single serve packets are still a big priority amongst consumers, right? If we look in our purses and our briefcases and our backpacks, you're inevitably going to be able to pull out a sachet that has, you know, I don't know, some Tylenol in it, or a stick pack for some protein powder. So these are all those little single serving type packets that we like to just throw into our bags and have handy whenever the time arises. Now, in fact, here, that's what I actually pulled out of my briefcase this morning. I took a snapshot of just 3 random things that were in my briefcase. So it's not hard at all for me to see that stick packs and sachets are a high priority. Now, I'll go back here to that survey. One thing that I think was surprising to us was that the shrink sleeve was only about 19% of these converters were in that shrink sleeve application. And so, you know, we actually did a little bit more investigation, talking to those that were doing it. And the ones that were doing shrink sleeve and were being successful with it, we found were actually investing in their own shrink sleeve tunnels or shrink tunnels. And that takes some investment. You got to have some resources to be able to do that. So I think while shrink sleeve is certainly a large application, or there is a large movement towards shrink, I think, you know, it does take a little bit more money to get into that. And so maybe that's why not as many converters are making that leap. And they're looking towards some of the other applications first. So that kind of gives us some context of the printers themselves, kind of where they've got their experience, what kind of markets they're going after. The next thing was to understand the resources they were working with. And so the first question we had was just how many resources are you dedicating? How many of your production resources are you dedicating to flexible packaging? If you have 3 or 4 presses, are you doing flexible packaging on those presses just on a part-time basis, or are you committing these resources? So this was a big shocker. Over 75% of those that responded, of these 40 converters, were dedicating more than 2 presses to flexible packaging. And over a third of those were dedicating more than 3 or more presses to flexible packaging. So what does that mean? Well, these companies are dedicating some significant resources to this. They're really committing their resources to flexible packaging. So they must be successful. If you're putting 2 and 3 and 4 presses on flexible packaging runs, then you must be being successful with it. Now, the other half of this is understanding, well, what do these presses look like? So in the narrow web vein, we're looking at presses that are 7 inches up to maybe 24, 26 inches, might consider 28-inch press narrow. And a lot of those presses in these converters are more to that 10 to 13 inch range. So if you're a printer that has a bunch of 10 and 13 inch presses, or at least what we found is that many printers or converters are thinking, well, hey, I need a 24-inch press if I really want to get into flexible packaging. So again, we wanted to understand, well, is that the case? And again, we're surprised to see that a significant majority of this flexible packaging is actually being produced on 10 and 13-inch presses. So that's one of the more popular press sizes, and that's really not that wide. So it's completely doable with the resources that many printers already have in-house. So that then brings us to the next big thing to understand, and that's the pain points. What were the pain points and are the pain points as they migrate over and or incorporate more flexible packaging into their production? And so we gave them a list of common pain points and asked them to rank them from most to least significant. Basically, we just wanted to know what's the biggest challenges that you're facing. And we weren't really that surprised to see registration ranked up there pretty darn high, which I think we can understand from the perspective of narrow web presses, they're inline presses, many presses that are not designed to run extensible films, and running extensible films is very different from running paper and supported stocks. So this required more exacting tension controls, the potential of having to integrate more modern registration. So, basically you have to become an expert at tensioning and registration, and there may be some needs to update equipment. The second biggest pain was ink adhesion, and I think this kind of correlates, I guess, on some level to the first point, more so on the film side, just understanding how that ink and that film interact. So becoming an expert on inks and ink chemistries that are going to work well on some of these more complex film laminates. So that can be a challenge. Now, what's probably the most interesting point of this research was really to understand what is the growth potential in or for flexible packaging moving forward. Many want to see, where do I fit in this picture? Where do I fit in this mix of sampling from the survey sampling? Or what's the potential for flexible packaging moving forward? Is this something that's worth my time to invest in? And so here's the big reveal. This is probably the most interesting point. This represents more than twice the growth rate of North American narrow web label, of the North American narrow web label industry as a whole. So where North American label industry is around 3 to 4%, we're almost up around 10% here. So that's a substantial growth opportunity for moving forward, and for careful consideration of how can you incorporate flexible packaging? Does this make sense? Is this going to be worth your time? So with that, that was my big reveal, and I hope you find that interesting. I know we certainly did. It was a great sampling of printers, and that responded to this. Clearly, they have some experience and have a lot to contribute in knowledge towards this. So if anybody's interested in the content here, feel free to reach out to me, and I can provide you with a link to download our presentation. And with that, I thank you.
All right, Catherine, thank you so much. That was really insightful and great data, and I think our listeners can really learn a lot from that. So next up, we'll have Jeff Salisbury from Label Impressions. But first, I want another quick poll. How are you currently producing flexible packaging? Are you doing it on Flexo, on digital, on CI, combination? So if we could take a second and just kind of learn what everyone is utilizing. Okay. All right, so let's see. So most people are doing a combination of Flexo and digital, about 38%, 33 on Flexo, a couple on digital. So that's interesting. We've kind of got like a broad variety right now. So I'm going to switch over to Jeff real quick. We're able to.
Hello, Chelsea. Can you see my screen?
Um, Not yet, Jeff.
Should be able to see my logo there.
One second, folks. We're having a little technical difficulties here.
Yeah, it looks like it says it shows my screen, but you're not seeing it, huh? Uh-oh. Stop showing screen, and then I'll show it.
Yeah, it looks like it's, oh, there we go, Jeff. We got it. Thanks. Sorry, gang, for that.
Okay, hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Hope everybody can hear me okay. The gardeners decided this was the right time to start blowing outside my office. So I'll try to speak up. I'm with Label Impressions. I've been with the company for 24 years. We have been in business for 30 years. We do more innovative, technically challenging flexographic printing and converting, as well as digital recently. We've been certified HD Flexo since 2010. We do mostly UV, but some water-based still for certain applications. About 40% of what we do is flexible packaging, and the rest is still labels, but we're moving more and more into flexible packaging. As Catherine mentioned, the growth rate in FlexPack is about double that of labels. So we obviously see that where the market's heading, a little less price competitive on some of the stuff that we do than some of the label stuff, which is being commoditized. So heading more in that direction. We are our value proposition is that we're a technical resource to our clients, which is really what resulted in us building and selling label applicators and assisting with that. We found that it wasn't enough just to sell the labels, we had to help folks put them on. So it made sense for us to do the same thing with flexible packaging, which is why we got into turnkey packaging. So we will manage the process for our clients. And that goes beyond just sourcing a filler. We have built our own in-house lab. We do our own in-house stability testing. So we do a lot more, and that's in keeping with our value proposition of being a resource, a technical resource for our clients. We also do some narrow web digital on our HB 6800 press, looking at the wider web presses, but for now that's what we do. And with the HD Flexo, we're able to cross over back and forth, so shorter runs for digital and longer runs for Flexo, and cross back and forth, so that works nicely for us. Our business breakdown is interesting. We started out as a printer to the trade to really just a few select larger brokers, and then started doing work for other printers, offset printers, and now we're doing a lot of work for Flexo folks who are narrower web than us, or who don't have some of the capabilities that we have, specifically expanded content labels. We do some challenging constructions, 2-ply, 3-ply. We even did some 4-ply labels recently for a broker, a printer actually. So peel and reseal labels, we still do that for the trade. And then we do service direct customers as well, and brands, but our preference, or our we give preferential treatment to the trade. We did just complete the smallest 2-ply construction, a 1/4-inch 2-ply, which is kind of neat in keeping with our technical abilities. We're still there. Our market focus, we really work in all of these areas. We produce flexible packaging for all of these categories, but today I'm just going to focus a bit on personal care because it presents its own unique challenges. It is a smaller segment of the market. You can see food is a big piece. However, it's got challenges that are unique to the category and different from food and others, and we'll talk briefly about those. So we're going to talk about personal care sachets or packets. We do hear those used interchangeably. I think Catherine mentioned a definition for sachets, single use. So that certainly falls, this certainly falls in that category. We'll do a lot of single, double, triple, and quad packs, which means we'll have, say, a cleanser, a toner, a moisturizer all in one, or a shampoo conditioner side by side. So we do those, quite a bit of those in the personal care market. Our value proposition with FlexPak is color consistency to 1 1/4 delta E across all substrates. And I'll talk about that on a few slides after this. It can be challenging to hit color on certain substrates, but in personal care, that's what the clients dictate. Our clients dictate. They dictated that standard, and we kept it, so that's where we stay. We provide turnkey, so we'll do the print and manage the form, fill, and seal, and the lab testing, the stability testing with our in-house lab, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. There are basically two types of form, fill, and seal for sachets and paquettes. On the left, you'll see an illustration of a horizontal machine. Sometimes a brand of those is called the Bartelt machine. Typically, that's where we see the vast majority of personal care packets filled. Typically higher quality sealing and seams, little higher cost than vertical. The one on the right is vertical form, fill, and seal. Typically a little faster. You'll see that a lot with food applications, powders, things like that. Typically has a lower cost and a faster throughput. We do see it on longer run pouches, though. It really depends on the client's expectations, and it's important to talk to them about that, the types of seals and things like that. Specific challenges specific to smaller sachets and personal care. So definitely some unique challenges. Color matching on a gray cast material. When you're using a foil barrier, which you're using typically with liquid fills, it can be challenging to hit color in different materials, and different suppliers, different types of structures will have different brightnesses or whitenesses, and so a big part of the process to maintain that color consistency and that tight color tolerance is fingerprinting, and it can get pretty overwhelming and time consuming to fingerprint different presses, different ink systems, different coatings, and different structures. So that can really consume you. I mean, I've got a room full of fingerprint rolls, and we're constantly doing that and reading them in and adjusting the curves. So that's something you want to think about. Ink types and coatings, a book could be written on this topic, and I'm sure it has, and I know Ryan's going to talk a bit about this, so I won't get too into it, but I'll be available for questions. But this is probably the biggest, and this isn't just for personal care, this is really for food and everything. A lot of folks make the mistake of thinking if they just use a low odor UV, they're covered. As long as I don't smell that UV, my client's good. And that's the biggest mistake I think a lot of folks make when entering into this market from narrow web labels. And it is a big mistake because there's a lot of liability there. Just because something is low odor doesn't mean it's low migration. And then low migration doesn't mean it's acceptable for all applications. So really, I think the takeaway here would be to work with your suppliers. Really work with your suppliers. Ask them what's available. I was shocked to find that our suppliers weren't really offering us in the beginning. They weren't offering up information about low migration because a lot of folks don't do it. And I'm shocked at how many people still print food pouches, cannabis, medical device packages, and personal care pouches without using low migration or other or the right inks and coatings. I opened a bag of I won't say the brand, but pita chips a while back, a full-size bag, and detected the distinct odor of benzophenenes, uncured UV, and I couldn't believe it. And I called the manufacturer, and they were clueless, of course, and didn't do anything about it. So, don't jump in and start printing with your usual inks and coatings. Find out what's necessary, and your clients won't know either. They don't know, and they won't ask, and a lot of them won't ask. So it's important for you to understand what's needed. Very important. Mike, again, Ryan will talk quite a bit about that. Measurement of migration is critical. You'll need proper instrumentation to do that. So you want to make sure that you're able to do that, and ensuring that if you are using UV, you're using the right UV that's acceptable to your client and that industry and for that type of product. You want to make sure you can measure that. Beyond inks and on press concerns, some of the challenges, there are a lot of challenges that go beyond that. There are a lot of pitfalls, and what you don't know could really bury you, as you see in this image. One of the funniest or most interesting things that we learned a while back was nomenclature used is varies per customer. So, you know, in labels, it's pretty simple. We talk labels or number of labels. We talk MSI internally, and our clients talk number of labels or repeats. We have found some clients talk in terms of finished paquettes or talk in terms of repeats, or we'll talk in terms of MSI. If they're talking MSI or they're talking finished pouches and you're running 7 lanes across and you think they're talking repeats, you could have a problem there. So as you see in the illustration, we've had clients buried with far too many pouches because we weren't speaking the same language. So that's important with FlexPak. Finishing can be, figuring out what type of finishing you're going to use can be challenging. We do mostly inline laminating, which can be very tricky. It is the easiest and fastest throughput, which is important to our clients. There is a steep learning curve. I strongly recommend you work with your suppliers on that. There are suppliers out there that understand how to do it and what's needed, and you can do it in line. So that's how we do most of it. And then, of course, offline laminating, which is the way most wider web folks will do it. That would be called solventless laminations. There's a high capital investment. You've got to purchase a solventless laminator, do it offline. Slower turn times. You've got to wait for cure. You've got to test for cure, delamination, and it's limited. Only certain substrates can be used. So quite a bit of them, but certain can. And what you'll find in the next slide is there are a lot of different substrates that can and should be used for personal care products. Ryan will be talking quite a bit about electron beam, which really is, I think, the preferred method, but it's expensive. It's a high capital investment. If you're a narrow web label printer with 3, 4, 6 presses, you're probably not going to be ready to make the huge investment in electron beam, and you're going to want to do that for wider equipment. So, so you may not want to get into that, but worth looking into. And then lastly, we're hearing a lot about new offerings. Some of the self-wound companies, laminate companies, are starting to offer self-wound. Some of them are saying, hey, just throw this on your press. If you print labels, you can print FlexPak. It's as simple as putting our self-wound roll on and you go. I would be careful with that. Migration can occur both directions. So inks can still migrate through self-wound, and the cost can be higher as well. So it's tough to be competitive in using that. So I would recommend really researching all the lamination types. I can't stress that enough. It can be tricky. And delamination on a line, on a filling line, can be expensive for you, for the converter. So really important to pay attention to how you laminate and invest in the testing equipment to make sure that you're not delaminating before it hits the client, or that it doesn't delaminate when sealed. Understanding how it's being sealed, what the dwell times are, what the heat settings are, and you'll get calls from fillers who will say your stuff's delaminating, or it's bubbling, or it's not sealing. And sometimes it is as simple as going out and adjusting their dwell time or their temperature, and a lot of folks won't do that. They don't want to do that. So you'll have to understand that and understand what your film is going to do and what your lamination is going to do, ensuring you get the right coat weight down and ensuring that it seals properly. And having the right equipment in-house is critical for that. Liability, probably the biggest one. When you're doing personal care sachets and pouches, some of that stuff can be expensive. Some of it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? Sensitive to light, to heat, to bacteria. Your liability now goes far beyond just, when you have a label, it's just the label on the product, and maybe worst case you have to reprint a label, or you might have to participate in relabeling, which can be expensive. If you think that's expensive, you'll be shocked when you find out what it costs when you're involved in a product recall, or you're told that you're liable because you handled this, or there may have been contaminants on your structure, and that transferred to the product that somebody put on their face, on their skin. That's where stability testing comes in. I can't stress enough stability testing. We tell each and every one of our clients, no matter how benign the product is, that they need to do stability testing. Most don't have the time, or say they don't have the time. They're unwilling to do it. They'll certainly have plenty of time if there's a contamination issue, but it's something we stress and we recommend you stress. You don't need to do it in-house. There are labs that do it. There is a cost. There can be some challenges working with labs. You'll want to understand their GMPs. You'll want to understand how they do things. We do it in-house. We do accelerated age testing. We'll fill various pouches with product, and then we will open them up, and we've got the right testing equipment to ensure or to check for delamination, for leaks, check for burst strength, all of those things. And I can't stress enough, because your liability is high. What you see here on the left is just a portion of a stability test. And so you'll see below weeks 0 of 12, 2 of 12, all the way through 12 of 12. Typically at 12 weeks, things start to stabilize, and you can tell what's going to happen. And as you can see here, different structures, different sealant layers different properties will hold product differently. So we strongly recommend that testing. Yes, you can look at ingredient decks first, and we always do that as a first pass, and we'll cross-reference with our our library, or we'll work with our suppliers on that. But we don't just rely upon that. You can find that sometimes something that sounds really benign, essential oils, a certain percentage of essential oils, or alcohol, or salicylic acid, there are things in personal care products that can quickly eat through a sealant layer and other layers and delaminate that pouch, and you can have leaks. And again, you've got some liability. You're looking at helping someone recover their costs of lost product. So you'll also want to work with the fillers on their micro testing. You're now in the chain of custody, so you'll want to see how they micro test. How often do they micro test? What are their cleaning procedures? How often do they do it? Is it audited? GMPs are critical both in your plant and the fillers plants. What certifications do they have? You don't want to take shortcuts with that stuff. And lastly, the chain of custody concerns. As I mentioned, you're in the chain of custody, but the worst thing you could do if you're managing this is allow a client to ship product to your plant. Most of us probably aren't certified to handle personal care products. And so if somebody, there was a case way back when we started this where I walked out and there were 4 55-gallon drums of face cream on my floor. We don't do that. We don't accept that product. And when you do that, you're now in the chain of custody. And if there's a microbial growth issue or a fungal issue, you're now in the chain. So if it does come to you, which it shouldn't, you'll have to do testing, and you'll have to wait for that testing. Typically 3, 4, 5 days before anything can be done. So you'll want to learn about that. Even if you're not filling, you'll want to learn about that stuff. So your liability goes far beyond the film with personal care sachets. It's the product. Yeah, I just focused here on personal care. If you've got questions on that, we do work with the trade. We're happy to sign non-disclosures and non-circumvents and work with you if you've got a need. Our philosophy here is that the rising tide floats all boats. So even if we are competitors, we like to raise that tide. It helps us if folks are using the right materials, and if we can help with that. I can't say how many times we've competed with someone who the client can't understand why we're higher, and when we finally see the structure or get the structure and reverse engineer it, we find that it's not the right structure, and so we are higher in some cases because we're using the right structure, but we remove that liability for our clients. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chelsea, and I'll be available for questions. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really, really great. One of our listeners did have a question, which I think we can answer right away as we're switching over to Ryan, is they were wondering what kind of presses you're producing and what widths you're producing flexible packaging.
That was for me?
Yeah, that's for you, yep.
So they're narrow web flexo presses. We're a Nilpeter house, so we use Nilpeter. And our widths are typically 17, and we tend to get a lot of stuff out on the 17-inch presses.
Cool, great, Thanks. Now, real quick before Ryan gets going, we've got one final poll where we just kind of want to ask and see what area of flexible packaging people are most interested in learning about. So I'll give you a few seconds to, answer. Are you interested in conventional or digital printing? I know food safety is a big topic. More materials, inks and coatings. So we'll give the audience a second to answer before we move on to Ryan. Okay, so this looks like most people are interested in conventional and digital printing. That's interesting. We've got inks and coatings up there, food safety, pouch. So it's kind of across the board, but most are interested in the process, it looks like. So great, thanks. Now, Ryan, you're up.
Awesome. Well, thank you for inviting me onto the panel, and it's been helpful to hear Jeff and Catherine talk about some of these things. Today, I'm going to focus a little bit on what it looks like from a digital perspective. If you are looking at potentially HP Indigo or other digital platforms to do flexible packaging, what might be some of the things you would want to look for, and what would assure success as you approach that platform. And I think Jeff gave a really good overview of some considerations in terms of flexible packaging in general. So a little bit before we continue, I'd like to talk just a little bit about who we are. We've been around since 2002, and we were one of the very first digital shops in North America. And we started with, again, all digital then, and we started flexible packaging shortly after we had launched with Narrow Web Indigos. In 2009, we were part of the HP 6000 beta, and have had a pretty good relationship with HP Indigo, and have been involved in a lot of the technologies that's been rolled out. In 2015, we purchased the Indigo 20000, so we are doing some mid-web flexible packaging now, and that led into the purchasing of pouch making equipment, which we are now ramping up this year. And so, from our perspective, we try to approach the market in a different way. There's a lot of competitors in the conventional space, and we don't necessarily want to compete in that same way. And so our business is built and oriented solely around digital. We do have a couple of flexographic presses for some specific applications, but for the most part, over 90% of our revenue comes from digital. So a little bit about what we offer. We do focus a lot on the marketing side of the equation. A lot of printers and converters will tend to work and collaborate with procurement, which we still do, but we focus a lot on collaborative ideation with marketing. It means that we are offering a lot of solutions from an art perspective, a lot of rapid on-press prototyping. And another place where we differentiate is we have in-house software development, and this has been a place of focus since the very beginning of the company. We offer those software solutions to our customers, and this is done in a way to help smooth out everything that happens from concept to final delivery and co-packing. And so that's a critical component. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few other slides. We also do a lot of package and application engineering internally. We offer a lot of data analytics, procurement tools, reporting, and all of that is built in a way to support rapid turnaround. And I'll talk a little bit about that from a digital perspective. So that's a little bit about us. And really, I want to talk about a few pillars of success that if you haven't purchased digital yet and you're looking at buying digital, what would I be considering right from the beginning? And first and foremost, I would be looking at trying to understand in depth your corporate sales culture. Digital will challenge the conventional sales model for packaging. There's a lot of differences and nuances with regards to digital. I would say that by and large, it's not necessarily easier, but it may not be harder. It's just different. And so making sure that you have the right people on your sales team and sales leadership, how do you incentivize the sales behavior? All of those are components that you need to consider. Another component, like any big decision, what is your justification for doing it? And the reason I bring that up is that there is a large focus on the crossover between conventional and digital. And I would say that if that is the sole reason that you're exploring digital, that it may not be sufficient for the investment. There are areas where digital has a huge value proposition and it can add a lot of value to your company and to the brands that you service. But if you're solely focused on the crossover, meaning you can run the shorter run work at a lesser cost than conventional, you may be missing the boat a little bit, and it may give you pause, hopefully some reason to think and consider that. Additionally, we feel like you need to understand your labor capability. Digital will stretch your team in different ways. You'll need different skill sets in different areas than potentially you will consider with regards to conventional. The press operator the profile of the press operator that we typically hire may be a little different from a flexo press operator. Our flexo press operators are mechanically inclined. They're really, really solid operators, but our digital press operators are a little bit more computer savvy. They know software systems just as much as they are willing to get their hands dirty and greasy and get into the press and rip it apart. And so just evaluating your labor capability is important. And then lastly, fast means fast everywhere with digital. When we first started, we realized very quickly that unlike conventional, where you may be dealing with 10 to 20,000 SKUs in a year, with digital you're dealing with 3, 4, or 5 times that. And sometimes you'll be dealing with 10 to 20,000 SKUs in a month, depending on what you're doing. And so having the systems in place in the front of the house and the back as well to handle that is really critical. And that's one of the reasons why we have internal software development. We don't use LabelTrax. LabelTrax in many ways is too limiting to what we're trying to accomplish. And so understanding that fast means fast everywhere. And I'll get a little bit into that regarding finishing. And in the photo here, we have Brady, one of our press operators, that's looking at some stick pack work that's coming off of a 30-inch EDAL. This is the ABG 3000 that's equipped with electron beam. And the reason why we chose the electron beam is because, again, it supports this idea of fast means fast everywhere. We used to have a Nord Mechanica. We got rid of that. When we realized that you're going to be adding very expensive digital ink to a potentially expensive pre-laminate, foil pre-lam or whatnot, it didn't make a lot of sense to take that and then burn 2,000 feet of it on a Nord Mechanica solventless laminator to do the setup. And so we decided to go with electron beam, which allows us to produce work very quickly, very efficiently. And there's no cure time, there's no wait time. We slit in line, as you can see right here. We don't wait 2 or 3 additional days for additional processes. And so that's a critical component to what we do. Talking a little bit about some of the pitfalls and traps that you may uncover, and there's some of these are just the same as it is in the conventional space. It may be a little bit more amplified with digital. For example, the upstream and downstream supply chain. So I just talked a little bit about lamination. Electron beam helps solve the downstream supply chain in terms of the equipment and the vendors that you'll choose and partner with there. You may want to consider not going down the path with solventless lamination if you really want ultra fast performance and speed to market. Upstream, as was presented with Catherine's slides, the vendors for material getting the right pre-laminates made if you're going to surface print, or even if you don't have a laminator to create your own structures in-house, that can be problematic. So finding a quality toll laminator or a vendor that can slit to the widths that you want for the structures you want is still a problem. Speeding up only one aspect of the supply chain is not really going to revolutionize lead time expectations in our industry. And so that's, again, I said it at D-Scoop, and I'll say it again here, it doesn't make sense to hook a Ferrari up to a horse trailer and take it around the racetrack. You're just never going to win that way. And in many ways, the 20,000 from HP is the Ferrari, and it can get you to places very quickly, but not if everything else isn't aligned. Additionally, the HP Electro ink, which is the ink that we're using in Indigos, it has a lot of positives. The look and feel to Flexo is very close, good vibrancy. It has some unique characteristics that we appreciate in its polymer construction and how it's built chemically. But just like any ink, and just like it was indicated on the slides from Catherine, ink adhesion is still a challenge. just like it is with any other technology, don't expect a magic bullet there or in any other place in the industry. Go in with eyes wide open, that you're going to have methods to test for quality, just like you have in conventional. Again, and I covered on this, try not to sell on the crossover. And I think I covered enough on that, but really focusing on what value add digital can bring. We brought, for example, one of our brands that we service, we stopped by and had a discussion about what a variable data QR code could do for diversion and some things of that nature. And within a month, they had taken all their SKUs and converted them to variable data. And this was not only an unprecedented reaction time for a large brand such as this, but they literally changed all of their labels and packaging to include this. And this wouldn't have been effective to do any other way. Digital really added value there. Are they paying a little bit more? Maybe. Does it add more value than it costs per unit? Yes, absolutely. And that's the conversation that one will have. Again, sticking with a few number of material widths is important. A lot of people will try to apply what they do conventionally to Indigo. You don't want to saddle your Indigos, your digital presses, with a bunch of changeovers. So keeping, in our space, we have a few coating rollers only, and so that may mean that your run cost on a MSI basis for material may be a little higher, but overall your throughput's going to be better, your efficiency and uptime is going to be better, and it seems to net out. Again, HP is there to help. If you've been in contact with them, they've probably let you know that, but they also have DScoop, which is a co-op of it's a users group for digital owners and operators. I would recommend to develop a strong relationship with HP, but also really go to DScoop, engage with the people there. You'll notice that at DScoop and in general, digital shops are going to be pretty collaborative, and they're going to be willing to share their information and knowledge to kind of help you go through this process as you evaluate whether or not you want to get to digital. One metric that we kind of like to think of is, can a job get from PO to proof and to press within 24 hours? And I ask that because if you evaluate your personal system and if you feel like you cannot do that confidently, you may want to consider some things before you get into digital. What can you improve in your systems in the front of the house to make that a possibility? Because speed to market is kind of the name of the game, and if you're not going to leverage the press in that way, you're again leaving money and opportunities on the table. And lastly, it's not a prototyping technology solely, it is a production technology. That mindset has, when we first started with Label, everyone kind of jeered at us and laughed that, you've got this WebStream 50, it's this prototype press, it runs 24 feet a minute. How could you build a business? And yet we built a multi-million-dollar production facility and business off of it. And HP and Indigo and digital and inkjet and all the technologies are coming out that have now made it so if you don't have an Indigo or a digital technology in your house, now you may be leaving opportunities on the table, and now it's viewed in more mainstream. Well, that same thing is happening with flexible packaging. The 20,000 came out and there's some resistance. Well, maybe it's a prototyping press, but we're running 750,000 sticks, one SKU on that every day, and so it is a viable platform if you think about it correctly and you orient your business around that correctly. So having said that, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Really good, Ryan. Thank you so much. And we've got lots of questions, so I want to be able to kind of make our way through as many as we can. One of the questions was interesting. It said, is the standard expected lead time for substrates from roll stock vendors 24 hours, just like the label market is today?
I guess Jeff and I could both answer that. It depends on what it is. For converted pouches, I think the expectation is that it's quite a bit longer. For the conventional side, I think we've seen anything from 3 weeks to 18 weeks for stand-up pouch conversions delivered. Our go-to-market is 10 days, which I think is significantly faster than the average in the industry. For roll stock, it's a little different. I think that by and large, roll stocks, from our perspective, is about the same as label in terms of the expectation. So from our perspective, we'd say about 8 days or less, maybe even 5 days for roll stock.
So this is Jeff. It's a little different for us with the personal care sachets. It really depends on the substrate, as Ryan says. We find that for stand-up pouches, a lot of those structures are pretty stock, pretty standard, and sort of almost one size fits all. Not quite, but I mean, you know, a lot more so than with personal care liquids. A lot of our stocks will come in quickly, but there are some that have very long lead times. There are some high barrier. You know, there's some products that require very high barrier, and those products can take 2, 3, 4 weeks or longer. In fact, at one point we found there was a product called Barracks, and there were certain things that would only work in a Barracks pouch. And
Yep.
Barracks, as you know, was it was under allocation for a while, and
Yep.
you could wait, you know, 6 months. And so we bought up a lot of Barracks in anticipation of that because our clients couldn't wait. A lot of times when you get good at it, you'll start to make your own constructions on press. And when you do that, that helps with some of those lead times. But yeah, you know, it really varies. It really varies.
Okay, thanks, guys. So we do have some questions about, Ryan, your E-beam. Is electron beam curable laminating adhesives? Are they available for food packaging applications?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you can laminate or OPV. I'd say the balance of our work, I'd say 80% of our work is OPV E-beam, but we do a fair amount of lamination as well. I would say that it's less mature on the lamination side than it is on the OPV side, but there's certainly options available, certainly, and they're growing. It's getting more popular.
Yeah, we do have another question while we're on the OPV, and specifically with the HP Electro ink that you were using. What type of laminating or OPV is needed to protect it?
That's a great question. So HP's recently rolled out their pack-ready thermal lamination system. That's one vector that could be explored. You can also look at electron beam OPV coatings. Ashland has some, Daybreak has some. There's others in the market. If you look at like electro ink in terms of its stability from a thermal perspective and how it handles under seal jaws, you can with the E-beam improve that significantly. So I'm looking at applications in the retort space with electron beam to kind of paint a picture of how aggressive you can get with these with the E-beam technology. So it certainly is flexible in that regard.
Interesting. This question is wondering how inkjet technology has changed the market and whether it's possible to with UV to avoid the smell issues. So kind of two-parter there.
You know, I'll maybe Jeff has more experience on the inkjet side. I haven't particularly purchased or worked with any inkjet on the food safety side. The last I checked, there wasn't a lot of options on the inkjet side of the business with regards to flexible packaging. So I'm actually sorry, I don't know if I can help in that answer.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, we chose not to go inkjet. That's why we chose HP. So I can't really answer that question either. I know the inkjet inks are very durable, more durable than electro inks, but I can't answer I can't really answer any migration issues. I don't know enough about it.
Okay. Do either of you do food applications?
Oh yeah.
What?
Yeah, I would say a big chunk of our work is for food, but again, it's all indigo.
Okay. So some of the questions here are, what are some of the challenges with food safety aspects of flexible packaging?
Wow, that's a huge topic. That's a webinar in and of itself. I will say, you know, biggest challenge for us in the beginning is making sure your GMP is in place. So it took us 2 years to get audit ready, and there's just a lot there you feel like you're climbing Mount Everest, and so that's one challenge. Getting to the summit it's rewarding and it feels great, but then you realize, okay, well, there's another mountain in the distance. Also, Jeff really covered some really important components, and that is making sure, one, you have the right equipment to measure and test and validate and understand that what you're doing is safe. Understand that the FDA, how it works, and if you're shipping internationally, what are the other regulatory standards for each government that you're shipping into. understanding that what you do in that chain of custody, like Jeff said, those are all really important things, and it's probably a little bit too much to go over in a 30-second answer.
Yeah, and I can't stress that enough, Ryan. Good GMPs are important, and what you do, your process for printing labels, really, your SOPs and your GMPs aren't robust enough for FlexPak to do it right. Anyone can, I suppose, put these structures on press and provide the product, and provide flexible film. But the liability is significant. Some of these, your stuff is touching product that goes onto people's skin or in their bodies, and it's, the FDA is really unclear. I think the FDA is still trying to figure out how to regulate, how involved they should get, but they really should get more involved. In Europe, it's very clear what you can and can't do, what you can and can't use. In the U.S., very gray, and so folks can get away with a lot, but that's not necessarily the right thing to do. Back to the inkjet question, I did want to say UV inkjet is not acceptable for food packaging or indirect skincare products. I did get that information clarified. And again, yeah, food safety certification, there are various levels you can achieve. The most basic level is challenging. And what I see at other Flexo plants of competitors, friendly competitors, and colleagues of mine is not acceptable. It's tough. And, they consider that you have to look at it almost as if you're producing the food, because that's the way you're looked upon when being audited for that stuff. So it's a pretty big deal, but it's worth doing. I think it's absolutely worth doing. The market is growing fast, and there's a lot of opportunity for everybody. Just do it right. It would be my message. Do it right.
Yeah, well, excellent. Yeah, I think I agree with Ryan. I think there could be a whole webinar just based on that alone. But we are running out of time. I do want to give, maybe an opportunity for any kind of final takeaways. We do have a lot of questions still about, in your experience, what's the kind of best way to enter, or what have you done right? Where your successes have been in this market. So if you guys could maybe take a second and answer that.
Well, I would say crawl, walk, run. There can be a lot of pressure because the market is growing very quickly. There can be a lot of pressure to want to enter the market and capture as much revenue as you can. That would be a mistake. We've taken a good while to really ramp up. I mean, we've been working on pouching for over 2 years, dialing in everything that we want. We've been very methodical about the customers, the type of materials that we'll run, the type of equipment that we'll run, evaluating every step of the way. Having the self-control to go through that process, to go through the GMP process, to go through, and the patience required and the restraint, I think is really required to be successful. And if you can do that, you'll be able to make this work. Don't let some of these challenges or potential traps scare you away from it. If there is good money to be made, it's a wonderful market and quite a bit of fun. And so that would be my advice.
That's great advice, Ryan.
Yeah, my advice would be, I love what Ryan said about self-control. Have self-control. Don't dive in head first, or you'll be in trouble. I would suggest doing what we did. I mean, learn as much as you can. If you're on this webinar, then that's, kudos to you. So many folks think they know what they're doing. They don't rely on their suppliers. That's something we've always done. I bring suppliers in and I say, I know nothing about this. Teach me. And then I go to other suppliers to audit and verify, invest a lot of time learning. And, I would suggest doing what we did. And this is not a pitch to use us, but working with some of these a lot of the folks in flexible packaging, they're great people. And we still source some of the wider web stuff to some of these folks with the big CI presses. And they're happy to teach you. And they're hungry. They want the work. So we started really in this business not because we really wanted to get in FlexPak, but because our clients, we were doing labels for their personal care products and food products, and they started asking about flexible packaging. And we said, no, we don't do that, but we'd love to work with you and learn about it. So we started sourcing it. And There are a lot of people out there that are willing to work with you. And we tell folks that we work with, we'd like to work with you. Ultimately, we'll want to learn how to do it on our own. And we'll be bringing the work in-house. And they all say, that's great. We'll do it for you until you're ready, and we'll even teach you. And we're willing to do the same. We've done the same for our customers. So I would say rely on folks that have already done it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Ask for help and just source some of the work and be honest with your clients. Hey, we're sourcing this because we're learning, but we'll handle the headaches for you. And don't bite off more than you can chew. Take it slow. You don't learn. You're not learning if you're not making mistakes, but don't make the big mistakes. Let someone else do that for you.
Very good. Yeah, kind of like what Ryan was saying, crawl, walk, run. I like that. And you know, speaking of asking for help, I know there are still lots of questions here, but one of those places is to talk to your suppliers too. And you know, Label Expo is coming up this fall, so I encourage you to talk to your suppliers about the products for flexible packaging that they'll be showing in September. And if you have any more questions, you can feel free to contact any of us at the addresses listed on this holding slide. We also ask that now that the webinar is over, if you just take a minute to complete a quick survey for us, it helps us to continue to bring you top-notch content like this. And stay tuned for more webinars from Labels and Labeling on the flexible packaging market. So thank you to Catherine, Jeff, and Ryan for your participation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.